Okay, so thank you everyone for coming today to our WDL 101 training. I do just want to cover a few logistics before we get started. I pasted this in the chat, but all of the slides and registration materials for today can be found at this bro.io/WDL101. So that includes the slides that I'm showing you right now. There's also an example script in that folder. So if today, when we're live coding and writing our scripts, if you run into an issue, we can pull that, we can download that script and use that to upload to Terra if we should get stuck. We do have a hands-on workshop for today. This is meant to be hands-on, but we are in webinar format, which means that in order for everybody to kind of get through this, I'm going to request that you watch the demo steps first and then do the actual hands-on. We're going to give you time to do all the hands-on activities today. So I just encourage everyone to watch first because it can be kind of tricky, especially if you're only working with one screen, to be trying to do the exercise while I'm showing it on my screen. So, we have a billing project today that I mentioned, and I've been sending out emails for it if you want to jump on to be added to this billing project. Again, just send the email that you use to register for Terra, so that login email, to Kaylee in the chat. Kaylee is going to be helping out today and TAing. She has TA in her name. And if you have any questions, this is meant to be a learning experience for all of us. So please feel free to unmute yourself to ask questions in real time. If you run into errors, feel free to say what error you're running into. We are live coding. I'm probably going to run into errors because that's just what happens when you code in real time. And if anyone else has any, we can learn kind of from each other and work through it. So I really encourage everyone to just feel free to unmute themselves and talk. Okay, so that is just sort of the overview of logistics. And I just want to reemphasize what we're going to do today. We're going to learn how to write a basic WDL workflow syntax, how to specify workflow inputs and outputs, and then upload our example workflow to the Broad Methods repository, export it to a Terra workspace, and set up and run that workflow in our Terra workspace. And at the end, we'll come back together and we'll learn about resources that can maybe support you in your WDL workflow development. Any questions so far about that anyone wants to ask? Okay. Okay, so right now I'm just going to give you a brief overview of some WDL workflow basics. And I can't remember if I introduced myself, but I'm Liz Kiernan. I'm one of the lead educators on the data sciences platform here at Broad. And I'm very excited to give you this little intro to WDL 101. All right, so let's kick it off with what exactly is a WDL workflow. When you're thinking about your data analysis, starting from your raw input and the different steps that you need to do to take it to publication, a workflow or a script is a part where you can, that you apply maybe to all your samples in preparation for that statistical analysis or downstream more bespoke analysis. These are steps that you might want to automate. And the workflow itself is a set of instructions that connect multiple steps that can be useful for doing this automated analysis. In Terra, we use workflows that are written in the workflow description language, and that's a human readable and writable syntax. WDL is it's workflow description language. It's abbreviated WDL, WDL, but it's pronounced WDL here. And that is what we're going to be writing today, one of these WDL scripts. So there are essentially 4 things that you need in order to successfully run your WDL script in the cloud in Terra. You need a Docker container. This is like a portable package of software and dependencies, which I'll go more into in a moment. You need your workflow, your script written in the workflow description language, WDL. You need an execution engine to run that workflow. We're going to be using Cromwell on Terra. There are other execution engines that are out there, but I just wanted to call out Cromwell specifically because that's what Terra uses. We're not going to talk about Cromwell today because in Terra that happens a lot in the background, and it's beyond our basic coding tutorial here today. But if you're interested, Cromwell does have documentation too, and you can go and learn more about Cromwell configurations. And then, of course, lastly, you need your data, the actual input that you're going to transform and analyze using your workflow script in your software. All right, so let's dive into these first two a little bit more, starting with Dockers. So I mentioned this already, but a Docker is essentially a portable package of software and its dependencies. So if you can think of a use case where maybe you've worked with colleagues and you're trying to analyze the same data, and you've asked your colleague, well, what version of the software are you using? And you go and you find out, oh, you're using the wrong version. Or you go to update your software and you get an error saying your Java is the wrong version. Dockers kind of take these problems out of the equation because it literally contains the exact software and all those dependencies like Java that your colleagues are using. And these Dockers, these portable packages, can live in different public cloud repositories and private repositories. But a few of the public ones that you'll commonly see are Docker Hub, Quay, and Google Cloud Registry. Today, I'm going to show you an example of a Docker that lives on Docker Hub, so you can get a feel for kind of using these public repositories. And once you have a Docker that maybe has the software of interest that you want to use, you can use it in a couple of ways. You can actually use it on your local machine interactively. So you can go into a Docker and test the software that's in it, make sure it's doing what you want it to do. But you can also use these Docker images in a WDL workflow. And we're going to see an example of that today. And you can specify these Dockers in the runtime section of your workflow when you set up the computational settings for a virtual machine to run everything on. You can create Docker images. So if you go into one of these public repositories and you're looking for particular software or version and it doesn't exist, you can also create your own Docker image. We have a few tutorials to get you started on this from Terra, but I also recommend just going into the Docker documentation as well to learn more about doing that. But I wanted you to know it was an option. Okay, so that's Dockers. And let's talk a little bit more about WDL scripts themselves. What do they actually look like? All right. So when you're thinking about your data analysis and what you want to do to your data, you might imagine that there are multiple steps that you want to perform on your data. So maybe for each of those steps, you're calling a different software, or maybe for each of those steps, you're calling a different tool of the same software, a different function. So when you're thinking about breaking down the workflow into those concrete steps, you can think of each of those steps as being a task. That's what WDL uses to kind of break up these different steps. So here what you're looking at is an example of a task in the workflow description language. Here we're looking at task A. And you can see from this diagram that it has some common sections. It has an input section where you can declare different data types and assign them to a variable. So here we're looking, this input has two files. One's called, one is assigned to a variable named ref, one is assigned to in, and there's a string here. Then there's a command section. This is the section that actually uses the bash commands that will tell you what you want to do to your data to actually transform your data. So you're going to be calling software in this section and setting up software parameters here, just like you would do if you're using bash from your terminal. There's a runtime section, and this is where you can set up different computational parameters for your task. So again, thinking about tasks, we're thinking about a specific piece of software maybe that we want to call to analyze our data. We can call a Docker that has that software on it, where we can actually perform this command. And then there's an output section. So of course, you're transforming your data, you take in your input, and you're going to have some sort of output, whatever you've done to your data to analyze it. So that's one task. And you can imagine that a workflow would actually have multiple tasks strung together, either running in parallel or running sequentially. So to group all of those tasks together, we have a workflow definition. So here's an example of a workflow definition, high level. Here you can see we've declared a workflow name, and our workflow has inputs that we can configure. So these are actually the things that we will configure when we're working in Terra, these different inputs. Now these inputs can be used to feed into one task, or they can be used to feed into multiple tasks. But this is the actual part in your workflow definition that you're going to be setting up today. You'll see an example of that. And then you see that within the workflow definition, there's these call sections. These call sections are used to call the different tasks that you've written. And when you call a task, maybe your task has inputs that you need to assign. So here we've looked at these examples where we have a ref variable here, that's a file. We can assign that ref to whatever we set for our workflow definition input. Here we're setting it to whatever my ref is. And as I mentioned, you can call one task, you can call multiple tasks. So here we're calling a second task, task B. And the input to this task B is whatever the output is of task A. So you can use outputs of tasks as inputs to other tasks as well. And in this example, in this workflow script example, we're defining these different tasks, task A and task B, in the same WDL script here. So these are written into the same WDL file. But I want to mention that tasks don't need to be written into the exact same WDL file. You can put them into their own WDL file and import them into your workflow. So I just wanted to mention that that's an option. Today we'll be writing our task directly into the WDL, but you should be aware that you can modularize WDLs and bring in tasks from other WDL scripts. All right. Any questions about that high level overview so far? Okay. All right. So as I mentioned, when you write that workflow definition, you have inputs. And whenever you're running WDL, in order to set up those inputs, we run a companion file with our WDL script, and that's called a JSON file. It's a configuration file where you actually specify what your files and what your string values are. So when we're working in the cloud, for example, if we're specifying a file, we can specify the exact cloud address of that file in a JSON file so that Cromwell knows where to pull the inputs from. So you should just know that anytime you're running a WDL script, whether you're doing it locally or in the cloud, you're going to have a companion JSON file that goes with it that tells the WDL where to find the inputs. And fortunately in Terra will read in a WDL workflow automatically. So it'll pre-generate a JSON file for you that you can set up in the user interface. And that's actually what we're looking at in this image here. You can see there's this inputs tab. So Terra has automatically read the script, the WDL workflow, and brought in the inputs for us so that we can configure it right there in the UI. And that's what we're going to be doing today when we bring in our workflows. Okay. Just wanted to make a note about where you can actually both push workflows to and pull them to in Terra. So there are two main repositories that you can bring workflows into that you can then use in Terra. One is DocStore, which is a GA4GH compliant open source platform for Docker-based tools. DocStore is very useful, especially if you're already coding in GitHub, because you can push your GitHub code directly to DocStore and then bring your workflow into Terra. Today, however, we're going to be using the Broad Methods repository. This is a legacy repository from the early days of Terra, before it was even Terra. All the workflows in here that are public are still fine. You can search for them and pull them in if you want to look for workflows that already exist. But the benefit of using this one today for us for training purposes is that we can code on the fly. So we don't need to worry about maybe some GitHub permissions that we would need to set up to use DocStore today. So that's why we're using the Broad Methods repo for today's exercise. Okay, so that's my high level overview of WDL workflows. And now we're actually going to really dive in and start to break down an example one. So in order to write this workflow, again, we have to have access to Terra and the Broad Methods repo. So I have a few setup steps that we're going to do right now together. And then we'll get into the actual hands-on scripting that we're going to do today. So I want everyone to go to this WDL Puzzles workspace. I'm going to put this in the chat for you all. Okay. So if everyone could navigate to this workspace, I'm going to go there now too. Let me blow this up a bit. Okay. All right, so this is the Whittle Puzzles workspace. And now everyone can just watch me for a second. As I mentioned, I'm going to give you time to do the things that I'm showing you. So everyone just watch me once you get here. You will need to log into Terra to access this workspace. So do make sure you log in before clicking that link. All right, so this workspace was actually designed to give people some hands-on activities where you solve a Whittle puzzle. And if you want to try this workspace after the workshop, I encourage you to come back to it and do that. But we're not going to be doing the exercises that are actually in this workspace today. We're just using this workspace as a place where we can bring in our workflows that we write today. All right, so this is the part that I want you all to watch because we're going to clone this workspace. Just in case you're new to Terra, I want you to see what to do and what billing project to use. So to clone this workspace, we're going to go to this vertical 3-dot icon. Click on it and select clone. And then what I need everyone to do is to change 2 fields in here. We need to make a unique workspace name because today we're going to be working off the same billing project. So the names must be unique. I'm going to recommend everyone append their initials and today's date. So, oh wait, and I actually forgot even what today's date is. Oh wait, okay. So Whittle Puzzles, my initials and today's date. And then the second thing we need to change on here is the billing project. We have our Whittle workshop, our workshop Whittle 101 2208. So if you just type workshop in there, it should pop up for you. Those are the only 2 things that we need to change when we clone, and then we can select clone this workspace. Let me shrink this down so you can see. All right, now we can just click clone workspace. So if everyone could please go ahead and do those steps. Cloning might just take a hot second for everyone since multiple people are on cloning at the same time. But now is a good time to try this, to let us know if you run into any issues, if you can't get onto Terra, if you can't get onto the billing project that you want to use, let us know. And if anyone needs me to show those steps again, just let me know. I'm going to give everyone about a minute here to clone their workspaces.
I'm getting an HTTP error when I try to clone my workspace.
Let's see. You're logged into Terra?
Yeah.
And you tried to use the billing project from today?
Yep.
Okay. Can you share that error in the chat? You might need to refresh and try cloning one more time. Okay. But if you can share the error in the chat, we might be able to reach out to our frontline team right now to make sure that everybody can get on here. And then, okay. Any other issues with that? Is anyone else seeing the same error? Okay. I do want to make sure, since I can't see the error right now, I do want to make sure that it didn't say anything along the lines of unique name needed or anything like that, because sometimes we do run into conflicts where people have the same initials, and so we do need to add an extra ending to the workspace name just to make sure it's unique. Did the error say anything like that on it, or just the number?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. No. Did you try cloning again?
Yep.
And did it give you the same error?
It did.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. We'll try to work in the background here.
Okay, thank you.
to get that fixed. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the next steps. And unfortunately, if you haven't been able to clone your workspace, this part we might have to come back to and revisit as soon as we kind of write our script together. But it's not a really complicated part, so we'll be able to have time to do that. I just wanted to show everybody how to actually access the Broad Methods repo, because that's where we're going to be live coding today. You can actually access it directly, so you don't need to do it from your workspace. I'll post a link in the chat for it too. But to access it, you can go to the Workflows tab of your workspace. And again, you can do this in the read-only version as well. And then where it says Find a Workflow, we can go to the plus icon. And we're going to go down and select the Broad Methods repository option. Once we're in the Broad Methods repo, we're going to click Create New Method here. And then it's going to ask you to create a namespace. This is like a folder that you can hold workflows in. It does need to be unique amongst all Broad Methods repo folders. I'm going to use my GitHub handle for this, so I'm just going to say Kiernan. So you can type anything, but again, it will need to be unique, so you'll get a message if it's not when we go to upload the WDL. And then you want to create a name for your workflow. I'm just going to use hello input and my initials and today's date, so that I know that it's this workflow. Okay. Can everybody see that okay? Yeah. Okay. All right. So those are the steps that I wanted everyone to take. So go ahead and do that really quick. And then I promise we can dive into the actual coding part here and answer some of these questions. So these are the steps that I just did. I just wanted to put them up here for you. Again, I'm going to give you all just a couple minutes here to navigate there and do that. And speak up if you have any issues accessing the Broad Methods repo. Anyone run into any issues accessing Methods repo? Okay. All right. Then I'm going to go ahead and move on now to what we're actually doing today, which is creating our own WDL workflow. Again, this is a hello world style workflow, so it is just an example. But I wanted to talk about what a WDL workflow looks like in practice and what the goal of our workflow is today. So today, the goal of our workflow, what we want to do is take in a user-defined input, specifically a string, a name that we provide to the workflow. And then we want that name to be incorporated into a greeting that says, hello, whatever our name is, and writes that greeting to a text file that we can then open, that'll live in the cloud. Now, I wanted to show you what this looks like in actual WDL script before we dive into the step-by-step here. So here you're looking at an example of a similar workflow. At the top here, you can see that it's versioned. This is using WDL version 1.0. That's the version that currently works in Terra. And then you can see two sections of this workflow. You can see the workflow definition here at the top. Again, the workflow definition brings together all of the tasks that we're writing. And then you have your task section here at the bottom. If we look at the individual sections, you can see, similar to what we've already shown you, there's an input section where we call a string and it's assigned to this variable name input. We have a next section, a call section here, where we call a task. This task is called write greeting, and you can see that's the name of the task we have below here. And this write greeting task has an input variable, this name for greeting, that needs to be assigned to something. So it's going to be assigned to whatever we assign to this name input in our workflow definition. And the workflow definition has an output here. So you can see we have a file called final output. And this is being assigned to whatever the output is for our write greeting task. So you can see write greeting dot, and then a variable name called greeting output. If we go down to our tasks section here, we can actually see the name of our task, write greeting, and it also has inputs. It has a string that we've assigned to this name for greeting. And then it has this command section here where we use a bash command echo to actually echo the greeting hello, whatever our name for greeting variable is assigned to here, with an exclamation point. And we take the standard output of this bash command and assign it to a file. And we can do that using something that's already built in to WDL. It's this standard output here, std out. And so here we're taking std out, will grab whatever the standard output is of your command section. And here we're assigning it to a file with a variable name greeting output. That's the same variable that we assigned here to our workflow final output. And lastly, you can see a runtime section here where we specify a Docker Ubuntu latest. And again, we're going to go into how do we find this? How did I grab this? What do I know to put in here? So that's just what a WDL script actually looks like in practice. And now what I'm going to do is go into the Broad Methods repo, and we're going to live code this and break this down and think about it the way you would if you were actually setting up a workflow. So I'm going to just minimize this for now. So again, this is where I'm going to demo some steps, and then I want you to, I'll give you time to actually do the coding yourself in real time. So, okay, so here I am in my new method that I just went to in the Broad Methods repo. And you can see here that I have some options to bring in my WDL. I can start typing or I can load from file. But today we're going to just live type this into the Broad Methods repo. All right. So when you're thinking about writing a workflow, approaching a workflow that you want to do to automate your data analysis, again, it's useful to think about what are the different steps or tasks that I need to do in order to analyze this data. So you're going to approach it by writing your task first. And in this case, the thing that we want to do to our data is take in that string and echo it in a response and write that response to a file. So let's go ahead and do this. Well, watch me and then I'll give you time to do it. But, so we're going to start by finding a task by first writing the word task. And then we want to give our task a meaningful name, something that actually describes what the task is doing. So in this case, I'm going to call this task write greeting because that's what this task is actually doing. And then I need a bracket to start this section of my WDL. So I'm going to do bracket and then return and then 2 spaces. So space, space. And the next thing I'm going to do is write an input section here, because again, I want this to take in a string. So to make an input section, I'm going to type input, bracket, hit return, 2 spaces, and I'm going to define a variable for the string that I want to bring in. So I'm going to call this string. You have to declare what your input type is. And then I'm going to assign this string name for greeting as a variable. Now, I could assign this name for greeting right now. I could hard code a name in here that I want this task to take in. I could say this equals Dana. But I don't want to do that because I want to be able to configure this name using my workflow definition. When I bring it into Terra, I want it to be able to run through either a list of names or I want the flexibility to change the name. So I'm not going to hard code this. So we just have string name for greeting. And then I'm going to hit return, delete 2 spaces, and close out my input section. That's all I have for my inputs here. The next thing I'm going to do is write a command section. So I'm going to type command. And we're going to use angled brackets here, actually, instead of our regular curly brackets. If you look at the WDL 1.0 spec, which I'll share a link to, you'll notice there are a couple that you can do this section in both ways. You can use brackets or you can use angled brackets here. We're going to recommend for best practice that you always use the angled brackets for this command section. And the reason for that is because it will allow you to more literally interpret the bash command down here without going into too many details. So we always recommend using angled brackets in this section. So we're going to type command, 2 spaces, and what our actual command is going to be. In this case, we're going to call the bash function echo. And I'm going to say echo hello. And then to pull in a WDL variable, we're going to use tilde, bracket, and pull in this variable name. So I'm going to say name for greeting. Close it, bracket, and do an exclamation point. Okay, and that's it. That's my command. So I'm going to hit return and delete 2 spaces and close out my angled brackets. The next thing I want to do is define an output for this. Again, I want to take the standard output of this whole command section and assign it to a file. To make an output section, I'm going to type output, bracket, return, 2 spaces. And again, I want this to be a file. So I'm going to say file, greeting output is what I want to call this file. Again, you can call this anything you want. It's just nice to have something that's meaningful to what it actually is. So we're going to assign this file to a variable greeting output, and we're going to set it equal to the standard output of our command section. And we can do that in WDL just using standard out. Okay. And then I'm going to hit return, delete 2 spaces, and close out my output section. All right. The last section I need to do is specify my runtime. So I'm going to type runtime, bracket, return, 2 spaces, and I'm going to set up a Docker. So I'm going to say Docker colon. Now, what Docker should I grab? So we need a Docker that can execute whatever functions or parameters we're running in our command section here. In this case, we're just using a Ubuntu command. So we're going to find the Ubuntu latest Docker. So if I go to Google and just type in Ubuntu Docker, you'll notice that it returns something from Docker Hub, the official Docker image from Docker Hub here. So I'm going to go in and here and just show you how this kind of works. So anytime you come into these public repositories looking for a Docker image, you'll notice that you'll have some different tags to choose from. Some of these tags might have a version on them. Some of them might be called latest, meaning this is the latest Docker image available. And regardless of what repository you're looking in, you're going to see an example Docker pull request. Docker pull is actually the command that you use to pull Docker images. And when you specify that Docker section in your runtime of your WDL, Cromwell's going to pull the Docker in the background using Docker pull. That means that whatever comes after this Docker pull, that's the full name that you want to grab for your Docker image. Sometimes it looks simple like this, Ubuntu latest. Sometimes it'll be more of an actual file path, like it'll say GCR colon, and it'll be a little bit longer than this. But Ubuntu is kind of a special case. But it doesn't matter. It's whatever comes after this Docker pull. That's what you want to bring into your runtime section. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to type in quotes, Ubuntu latest. And that's all I need to put now to grab that Docker that can actually help me execute the command in my command section. So I'm going to hit return, delete 2 spaces, and close out my runtime section. Those are all of my task sections that I need. Now I want to close out my task by hitting return, delete 2 spaces again, and I've closed out my task. So now my task is actually complete. And I'm going to give you all a few minutes here to write your own task section into the Broad Methods repo now. So go ahead and do that if you're in there already. And I'll take questions if anyone has questions while we're doing this.
Is there a particular requirement for the spaces?
Yeah, so it's what we've been told by some of the pipeline team members is 2 or 4 are the recommended. You can't intermix tabs and spaces, and in theory, tabs don't work. So 2 spaces or 4 spaces is what you need to do. I'm using 2 here in this example.
Okay, thanks. Oh, but does tab work at all?
No, you should not use tabs. You should use spaces.
Okay, gotcha.
I think there's some caveats to that, in the sense that if you're using an actual Whittle syntax editor and you tab, it will automatically use 4 spaces for tabs. But if you were to try to do tabs, say in this text editor here, that will not work. So just use 2 spaces for each indent. I noticed in the chat there was a Firefox issue. I do want to mention that we highly recommend you use Chrome and not Firefox for doing work in Terra, if that's possible. Okay. Would people in the room mind giving a hands up if they are done writing their task section? Can people do a raise hand? And just keep your hands raised. We'll give it another minute for others to finish up. If you are not actually doing the live coding exercise too, feel free to just raise your hand then, so that we're not waiting for people who aren't necessarily doing it today. All right, and let's see, Kareem, have you been able to figure out the Broad Methods repo problem? I want to make sure that.
Liz, it was a Firefox issue.
Okay. All right. Okay, I will go ahead and move on to the workflow definition part here. And again, we do have in that short, that bro.io folder that I posted at the beginning of the workshop, there is an example script too. So if you want to take a look at that, you can see the full completed script at the end here. And everyone can feel free to put their hands down now in the chat. Okay. So as you can imagine, we've already mentioned this, but you likely will have more than one task that you want to do to analyze your data. And so once you've written out your different tasks, you can bring those tasks together by writing your workflow definition. So this is the actual workflow definition that you're going to configure in Terra when you're setting up. So the first thing we want to do for our WDL script at the top here is declare a version for our WDL. So this is going to be version 1.0. That means we're using the 1.0 spec. It's important that you declare a version because otherwise Chrome will automatically default to draft 2 of WDL script. So, and in Terra 1.0 is the one that's in use. So type out version 1.0. And then we're going to write a workflow definition to bring everything together. So to write the workflow definition, we first say workflow. And we need a name for our workflow. And again, this can be something meaningful to whatever your workflow is doing. In this case, I'm going to call it hello input. And then we're going to do a bracket, return, space, space. Just like we did for our task, we're going to define an input section. So I'm going to say input, bracket, return, 2 spaces. And again, we want this input to be a string that we can define. So I'm going to say string and a variable name for this, name input. Now I could use the same string that I used down here for my task. So I called this string name for greeting. I could give the same name here, but if I wanted to reuse, say, this workflow input throughout different tasks, it might be useful to give it its own unique name that kind of works with how it's being used. So for this, I'm just going to recommend using a different variable name than what you're using down here. All right, so it's string name input, and we're going to close off this input section by hitting return, deleting 2 spaces, and putting a close bracket. The next thing we need to do is create a call section where we're going to call our task. So we have one task here, and we're going to say call, write greeting. And in this section, we need to actually assign the inputs for our task. So I'm going to do an open bracket here, return, space, space, input, colon, and then I'm going to return again and do space, space, and set my name for greeting equal to whatever it is I'm going to set up here in my workflow definition. So I'm going to say name for greeting equals name input. All right. And then I'm going to close out this section by deleting 4 times to get back to my call in line with my call here. Oops, close bracket. All right, so we close out our call section. And then the last thing we need to define in our workflow definition is our output, because we do actually want to get output from our workflow. So I'm going to define an output section here by typing output, open bracket, space, space. And again, I'm going to declare a file here, and this is going to be assigned to the variable final output. And this is going to be set equal to my task output. So to grab any kind of output or string from a task, we're going to type the name of the task, which is write greeting, and then put a dot, and whatever the variable name is that we're trying to grab here. In this case, the name of our output file is greeting output. So I'm going to type greeting output. And then I'm going to hit return, delete 2 spaces, close my bracket, and then I need to close my workflow definition by deleting 2 spaces. All right. And so that is how we can pull output from a task and actually make it output to our final workflow. So go ahead and write out this workflow definition section. I'll give a few minutes to do that, and then we'll upload it and export it to Terra. And let me know if you have questions while you're doing this.
How should I add comments?
I believe that comments can be just done by pounds. The number sign. So I can double check on that for you, but I think it's just normal commenting.
Yeah, I was trying to do that, and then on the bottom it has documentation populate from will comment. I don't know if that works.
You don't mean in this? Sorry, you don't mean in the script?
I do mean, like, I suppose I can write comments in my actual Widow script, and it can automatically populate to form a documentation. That's my expectation.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, it's just I put in pound in my comments and nothing happens when I try to populate. I don't know why.
I've actually not used this documentation section here, so I would have to look in and see how it's supposed to be used. But if that's a question that you have, I will find the answer and we will email you. We'll email the whole group with the answer to that question.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Liz.
Yes.
So I wonder for line 7, there's a colon after input. Is it because we only have one line under input section so that we didn't use the brackets?
This is within like the actual call section here. So this is just a different syntax for when you define inputs from your task here. The reason we're doing 2 spaces here is for best practices. So if you had lots of, say this, a lot of times your tasks are going to call in lots of files and lots of different strings. So if I had another thing here that I needed to assign, I would put it on the next line and so on. So that just kind of cleans it up a bit. This can also work if you just put it right after the colon as well. But the actual colon after is just part of the WDL syntax for writing the inputs for this task section.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. What I do? Just put that up. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and upload right now, just to make sure, because like I said, I'm live coding, so I'm sure I probably have an error in here somewhere, and I just want to make sure this is working. So once we're done writing our WDL workflow, we can upload to the Broad Methods repo by just selecting upload. We don't actually need to fill in this documentation. This is sort of an optional step here. And we also don't need to put in synopsis or snapshot comments here. So I'm just going to select upload. All right, and that actually worked. So does anyone want more time to actually write the WDL definition, workflow definition? Go ahead and speak up if you do. It's totally fine. I just want to make sure before I show you the next steps that everyone's comfortable with me moving on. Okay. All right, so the last thing then that we need to do is actually export our workflow to the workspace and set it up. So I'm going to show you all of these steps, and then I'll let you go ahead and do this with your own workspaces. So go ahead and watch me for the next few steps, and then I'll give you time and instructions to do it. So once our WDL is uploaded, we're going to hit export to workspace. Now it's going to prompt you to select a method configuration. We don't have a method pre-configured. We don't have a method configuration file to go along with this workflow. So you don't need one. So you just go down and say use blank configuration. And then it's going to prompt you to, again, you can rename your workflow if you want. If you want to give this a new name or something, you can do that here. I'm going to leave it the way it is. It's prompting you to select a root entity type. You can ignore this section. This is just what data table you want to use to configure it. And we're not going to use a data table today to configure this. And then it asks you for your destination workspace. So I'm going to select the clone that I made today. I have a lot here. Just put down, search for it with my date. Oh wait, there we go. Okay. And then select export to workspace. It's going to ask if you want to go there. Yes, we do. Okay. It's going to automatically take you to the workflow setup page. Here you can confirm the name of your workflow in the snapshot. The one thing we're going to change on this workflow setup page is that we want to run workflow with inputs defined by file paths because we're not using a data table today. And then you can see in our input section, our workflow definition input variable. So there is the variable that we set up in our workflow definition. If you wanted to confirm what the script looked like, you can click on the script here, and here's the same script that we just wrote together. So in this input section, I'm going to specify a string, a name that I want to use in my greeting. Again, I'm just going to type Dana, and I'm going to put it in quotes. It needs to be in quotes to use the string. And then I'm going to select save, and then run analysis, launch. That's going to take me to my job history. And in a few minutes, we'll be able to check back and actually look at the output from the run. So those are the steps for uploading your own workflow. And I will give those to you right now, if you'd like to give it a try. I imagine that there might be a few people who have some errors when uploading. So we can talk about those errors if you'd like.
I'm seeing the attribute. Maybe I'm missing something. The input attribute.
You're seeing
what is the input attribute?
It's whatever name you would like to set to configure your workflow to take in. So remember, the goal of our workflow is to take in a string, a name that we give it. You can choose any name you want. So you could put your name here if you wanted to, with quotes.
Oh, so it's not okay.
Yeah, it's any name you want. And that's the nice thing about having a flexible workflow input, that you can define it any way you need to. It also sets us up for using data tables if we had to bring in a lot of data into our workflow.
Excuse me, I can't run my analysis.
You can't run it? Did you select save?
Yes.
And are you saying, did you select this run workflow with inputs defined by file paths?
Yes.
So if you select that, it allows you to specify a name.
I've
And
done
then
all
you
of
select
that.
save.
Yeah, it's, the run analysis, the button is not coming up, so it's like blank. I think I'm missing something.
Does it look grayed out like this?
Yes.
Yeah, and so, and you have your name in quotes here.
Yes.
And you selected save here.
Yes.
And it's still giving you a blank. Did you actually export your workflow from the methods repo here?
Okay. I figured it out.
Oh, you did. Well,
you.
do you want to share what it was in case other people?
I think I didn't use the double quotes.
Oh, the double quotes. Yes, that will get you. It needs to be double quotes. We ran into that issue in our practice session too. So. Thanks for sharing your error with us. All right. Other questions that came up? Okay. Let me just check my job history here. Click into my workflow. It's still running. So while this is running, I just wanted to share with you these resources that we have in the slide deck, just so you're aware of where you can go to get additional help. And then I'll come back and check the workflow definition if people are able to hang around for a few minutes, or sorry, check the workflow outputs, I mean. So we have several resources listed here. The first one here is this Open WDL GitHub. I wanted to mention that WDL is community maintained. The community contributes to it. And so this GitHub is the repo where the spec is maintained and where you can also file issues and put out pull requests. There's also this Open WDL Slack channel. I hadn't actually been into this until recently, and it does seem like it's pretty actively used. And so I recommend going in there for workflow specific questions, because the community might be able to help you with some of your workflow troubleshooting. WDL 1.0 spec. This is the spec again that works in Terra right now with the Cromwell that's compatible with Terra. So this is kind of going to be the source of truth for how to actually format the different WDL syntax. We have some Learn WDL videos. These teach you how to set up and go through different scenarios using basic workflows like we did today. So different types of hello worlds that show you how to scatter gather or run things in parallel, run things sequentially. So you can find maybe some really nice basic use cases here. Theogen Genomics has their own WDL workshop that I wanted to highlight. This is hosted on GitHub, so you can check this out and see if it'd be a good resource for you. Our Terra documentation also has some WDL materials in it, and we're actively updating these right now. So they are not up to date with the WDL 1.0 spec. They're still, people have still found them very useful, and we are in the process of updating them. We're also going to be moving them to the Open WDL GitHub as well. And then there's these examples in the WDL Analysis Research Pipelines repository in GitHub. So WARP has several full-length, very complex workflows. So here we're linking to the documentation. So I recommend going in and seeing maybe a science use case that interests you, and you can find the link to the actual task WDLs and the workflow definition inside the documentation. It kind of breaks down what the different tasks are doing, so you can see how different types of inputs are being moved around different tasks. And then I wanted to call out BioWDL, which is an open source repository. They have a task library as well. And so you can go in and look at how they define some tasks. You can even, it's open source, so you can grab these tasks and modify them and reuse them to meet your needs as well. Okay, so that's everything I have for this. I also wanted to mention that we do have a survey available here. I'll paste this in the chat. This is our first time doing WDL 101 in a long time. We really value your feedback. So if this didn't have what you wanted in it today, if you wanted to see more, let us know, and we will modify this workshop in the future to meet your needs. We really, really want to see where people are struggling in their WDL development. So please feel free to use the optional sections in this survey to give feedback. This takes less than 3 minutes to fill out. So we really value that feedback. Okay, and then I want to make sure I got everyone's, if there are any other questions that people have. All right. Okay, so really fast, I will feel free to stay on. I'll show you what the outputs look like of the workflow output. But again, you can go in and explore for yourself as well if you're out of time right now. We are recording, and I will share this recording with people, so please feel free to jump off if you need to. So the last thing I just wanted to share was the workflow output here. So I'm clicking into my job history, and I clicked into the run, and there's this link here to go into my job manager. I'm just going to click in here and go into my outputs section. And here is my final output, the standard output that we set our run to have. And if I go in to the Google bucket and click on it, I can click the authenticated URL here. and see my greeting, and there it is. Hello, Dana. So that's how you can actually see the output file that you created. All right, and that is everything that we wanted to go through today. Any additional questions or trouble that people ran into that you'd like us to troubleshoot with you? All right, well, we really appreciate you all participating today and jumping on with us. As I said, please feel free to leave comments in the survey and let us know how we can improve this for you. I can stay on for several more minutes, so as people are wrapping up, feel free to ask me a question, but thank you all again for coming out. Thanks to our TAs who came out and Anvil team members who are out here today as well.